Good evening and welcome. One of the themes which the World Economic Forum looks at very, very closely every single year is the impact of conflict around the world. There is a profound geopolitical churn which has been taking place now for the last several years. Many would suggest that has to do with the geostrategic, the geopolitical scenario in Europe and certainly in West Asia. As far as the subcontinent is concerned, there are concerns on our Himalayan frontier. Why am I raising these issues? Because it at a certain level has a profound impact on the Indian economy. We've got three wonderful guests joining us today to take a look at this. Manish Kejriwal is founder and managing partner of Kedara. Yezdi Nagarpurwala is CEO of KPMG in India. And Arjun Dhawan is vice chairperson of HCC. Thank you all very much for being with us. Let me come to you first, sir. We are now in a scenario where there's a new Trump government in place in the United States. And with it comes the promise that the war in Ukraine, which has had an impact on, for example, food inflation, besides anything else, will come to an end in a finite period of time. How crucial is that as you look at the overall geopolitical scenario?
I actually think if you look at the war, Vishnu, it's been going on for close to 2 years. The ramifications for India vis-a-vis Russia is primarily access to their oil, which is a significant decrease in our oil import costs, the absence of which will provide a significant further pressure on the rupee, which anyway is under stress right now. So from that limited perspective, from an Indian perspective, it's critical. And I think what you're going to see, there was a perspective in the US and around the globe that both Putin and Trump were buddy-buddy, if I can use that word. If you look at what Trump has said since he has become president, albeit it's only been 48 hours, he has actually been very tough on Putin. And I think my sense is he's going to be tough on China in the medium to long term, and they probably will be a bit less, they'll probably get to some agreements. With Russia, I actually think he's going to be tough, and I think he's going to impose a certain amount of pressure on them to end the conflict. I think Zelensky also realizes he needs to get to a deal. So I think a deal is in the offing, whether it's 24 hours, that's already happened and it's gone. Will be 24 weeks or 24 days, time will tell. But I do think as India, we will get the ramifications of an indirect push, because if the only pressure Putin's going to have put on him by Trump is going to be further sanctions on oil, that's going to affect what Putin can do to India. And I do think if there is pressure put on our own government, I think the stuff around Tesla and the Starlink, that'll settle, but I do think the oil stuff will be a major discussion.
Let's talk a little bit about the oil scenario. With the new Trump administration in place, there is no guarantee that our import of oil is going to be as easily available as it is now. The United States might put more pressure. There are insurance issues as well. There's the physical transportation of the oil. Do you believe that will continue in the way that it has, oil imports from Russia to India?
So one thing we must accept, that Russia and India have a friendly relationship. And frankly, I have a flip side to the war question. If the war is not resolved in that finite period, and there are further reactions and sanctions by the US and Trump, there is a fair chance that India might get clubbed along with Russia and Putin. And that's something also that we should watch out for. So we might get some collateral or ancillary damage in that sense. Coming to your point on oil, yes, certainly. We are going to have to stay agile. There is an oil price and a security issue, but simultaneously now we are saying there's also a foreign exchange aspect that we have to watch out for. So there should be, yes.
Sorry, I have one contrarian view on the. I think India won't get clubbed with Russia.
I don't think so either.
I do think we have a special place given the geopolitics, and we have a very unique situation where the pressure is going to be China, and what the US and Trump needs in the area is a local ally. What we need to be careful is we don't overstretch that game and get to some sort of an agreement on the oil imports, but I think for the rest of it, it is probably a good place to be from a geopolitical perspective, and the support that the US needs in Asia especially given the pressures, not just by Russia, but more importantly, China.
Yeah, I think geopolitically, India has positioned itself in a position of we have commanded the respect of most countries around the world, and where if you look at partnerships that countries want to have, they want to have it both strategically and economically with India, right? So I think that we've achieved certainly a position in the last number of years which has established our sovereignty, our national security and energy security, and there is that old relationship with Russia. So I think there's a balance here. The conflict in the Middle East, for example, is something that I actually strongly believe will also get resolved, because the Trump administration began its first term with a clear goal to actually see that concluded, a deal, and I think that there's going to be a clear focus to do that as well. The biggest concern I have is on global debt. I think that the issue with the conflicts is something that I think will resolve itself. How governments around the world are going to be able to deal with the sensitivity of this deleveraging is really basically the biggest risk that I see.
I wanted to ask you all on tariffs, the sense that India is going to be impacted. Economically, some would say that that Trump is more is a lot more protectionist, and going forward, is there a real threat of tariffs on India and our economy?
Well, I think that President Trump has a way of commercially dealing, and I think that there's going to be a little bit of a stick and carrot approach that he's going to take to achieve commercial settlements with various trading partners. I think India as an economy is perhaps less export-led, dependent on perhaps some of the tariffs that might or might not get imposed. So I actually am a little more optimistic that it will impact India less. Now that said, I think economists around the world all will universally agree that tariffs are terrible, and it does basically impact global economic growth, and so ultimately there will be that impact. I actually just think that it's going to be a commercial arrangement that will arrive at a more practical solution.
You're optimistic about the tariff situation, are you?
It's actually early days. It's very, very difficult to say which way it's going to swing. And when you say tariffs, it's too broad brush. Exactly what's going to come into tariff, what's not going to come into tariff. But I would agree with Arjun. The scale at which we are exporting into the US is not the same as other countries. And that's good news and bad news, so there's a lot of scope in that sense. But it just helps us to be a little more agile in the scheme of things.
I actually think I'm a little bit less sanguine about the tariff situation, and the reason I say that is the following. I think we were all used to a multipolar world. When we were graduating, the world was getting closer. There was free trade. Today, you're going unipolar. Each country is to himself. I think we will again be a side effect of whatever Trump and the US believes is best for them. I think you'll see an administration which will be efficient, but it'll maximize what is right for America, not MAGA, but American corporates. So I think whether it's tariffs or not, but if there is need, for example, I think there'll be a lot more pressure on our government to open up for a Tesla or a Starlink.
That's a commercial negotiation. I mean, look, a tariff by nature is shooting yourself in the foot by giving yourself a supply shock.
But I think from a negotiation perspective,
correct. So
a bit like what they've done with Canada, you're not going to get 50% taxes in Canada, but it's a shot across the bow. So the negotiation will lead to
What do you think? Yeah.
No. I think, as I said, I think this is a worthy attempt to actually reopen up commercial discussions.
Okay, I'm running short on time, but I want to focus a little bit on China. We've got an improved situation. Improved is a relative term along the line of actual control. The Chinese clearly want to improve economic ties. There is an extremely close economic relationship that exists one way or the other, whether we like it or not. Do you believe that given the relatively better situation along the LAC, we might actually see more trade between India and China?
That's again.
That's $1 billion question. Several billion.
That's again a very, very tricky one. I'm not so sure. As Manish said, we are now getting into a unipolar situation, which means that China and India are going to get into a unipolar situation. Right. So I'm not. I mean, for us, it's very, very. It'll be tricky for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually think this is the other side of the collateral damage approach. What's going to happen here is the more pressure that's put on China, China has no option but to see who it ties up with in the region. If you already see the last couple of weeks, what Trump has realized that China's main partner is now Russia. I mean, there was a big meeting today or yesterday between Putin and Xi.
Certainly militarily, yeah.
If you look at when you had those knife attacks in Japan, normally China was very apologetic. I think in India also, seeing it sort of getting squeezed in a corner, it will be more practical. And I think as India, for this government, what we've done very well, whether it's buying oil from, we haven't been bullied into a spot, or we're not living by somebody else's rules. We established, I think our External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, under the leadership of Modi, done a phenomenal job of keeping our self-interest. I think you will see a thawing of ties with China.
Which
even if
includes
it's
the economy.
collateral.
Which includes the economy.
Well, I think that will be the negotiation. I think the cross-border.
No, so that's the question.
Okay.
That thawing has happened.
Yeah.
Right? Whether it progresses, we'll have to wait and see. But does that mean that there will be a greater economic exchange? We've had a very deep economic exchange. The Chinese clearly want that to take place. I mean, at multiple levels, we have a relationship. Is that going to be revived?
My sense is it will be. I think it's good. If you look at the value chain of the two countries, what you happen to see at COVID, Indian manufacturing was badly affected because we depended on some of the components from China. To what Arjun was saying earlier, any such false impediments to trade makes, it's guns and butter. It makes the economies inefficient.
All right, so he's sort of optimistic, I think that's the word, on China.
I'm less optimistic, but I think for a couple of reasons. One, I think we're in an economic cycle where China is still has huge overcapacity. There's still 30% of the manufacturing capacity in the world, and there's obviously there's a certain level of protectionism we need to have for our domestic industry. So we want to prevent dumping from happening. But look, I think I tend to be a little more circumspect because the China thinks in hundreds of years, right? I think you have a situation today where I think it would be fair to say that there will be an economic impact that will increase, but for India. India depends a lot more on China exports than the other way around, right? India is a much smaller market for Chinese goods. So to the extent that, China's deal making, implies a little more trade with India, I don't think it moves the needle much. I think the question is basically what is the kind of trade that happens, I think that determines, practical outcomes.
I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. Turned out to be a really lively discussion on some of the key geopolitical, geo-economic issues which impact India going forward. We're all over here in Davos where we're talking about economic progress and where the India story stands. These are a couple of issues which might sort of shift the needle one way or the other.